Good. Hello, I'm Nadia Bilchik, and today I am really delighted to be joined by Saren, who is the founder of Sage Speech and Learning Associates. And today we're going to be looking at if you need speech therapy for your child, but how has this kind of service changed during the COVID-19 crisis? So, first of all, Saren, a very warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
So, as a speech and hearing therapist, help us understand the services you provided prior to COVID-19 and how you've had to adapt.
Absolutely. Well, our services haven't changed too much, luckily. We're a private speech practice here in Atlanta. We typically see patients from birth to 18, so the pediatric population. And my therapist and I have been providing in-home services, in-school services, as well as clinic services in our Sandy Springs location. We see children with speech disorders, language disorders, academic and learning difficulties, stuttering, feeding difficulties, and other developmental disorders. So the great thing is that the children we work with and the families we work with are usually very dedicated to the therapy that their children need. Before this coronavirus, we were going into homes, going into schools, and we had our clinic as well, where we saw many of our patients. Now we're doing everything virtually. It's a little bit different, but the great thing is that when we're doing it virtually, we have parents there with us. So now the parents can see the therapy, they can be trained on the therapy, and they can actually implement it in their own home. Most of our services before, about 95%, were in person. We were doing teletherapy before, so luckily we were already set up for these kinds of services. We had our platform in place, we have our HIPAA compliant paperwork and video services in place, and our therapists knew how to use the platform. So we didn't have too much scrambling to do, although we did come together as a team to try and figure out how we're going to make this new world for us work.
So can you give us an example? So give us an example of a child who, let's say, is a stutterer, and what would a session of teletherapy work as opposed to in person with that specific child?
Great question. That's actually my favorite kind of session to do via teletherapy, because stuttering and its nature, the therapy is very parent heavy. So when the parents come in to see me every week for stuttering, I am playing and working with the child, but I don't have to touch them. So the parents come in, we talk about what's happening that week, the techniques that we're using while we play, and virtually we're doing the same thing. When we were talking about stuttering, the child is set up at their home with the parent. I brought some games here next to me to show you guys. And that
Please.
was some of the games. Yesterday, I made some monsters with some of the kids I was working with. So I had my colorful markers here, and I had my paper. And all the children had to do was tell me what kind of monster they wanted me to make. So they would tell me they wanted a pink circle for a big body, and I would draw it, show it to them on the screen, tell them how smooth their talking was. We would talk about the next thing to add to it. And I actually mailed these out this week to my clients. So my little 4- and 5-year-old clients are getting monsters in the mail this week. And a lot of the therapy we do, I'm just listening for their fluency, for how smooth their speech is, what's happening with their different kinds of stuttering that we're seeing, talking to the parents about, watch this technique, this is how I'm going to do this. And then the parents know how to carry it over at home. So those sessions are perfectly suited to teletherapy.
So if you have a child that you are concerned about because they aren't as fluent as other children the same age, and I think dysfluency, stuttering would be one of those, what are some of the signs you look for? And then how do you recommend that parents go about finding the right help?
Absolutely. So the kind of program that I am trained in that we do at Sage Speech is called the LIDCOM program. That's our main fluency program for ages 3 to about 6 or 7. That program is one of the only 2 programs that is endorsed by our National Licensing Association as the programs that have the most evidence and research behind them. And we're the only practice in Georgia who's trained in it. It's a personal favorite of mine. I used it with my own child about 8 years ago. It works beautifully. And that's something that you really have to take a look at right around the age they turn 3, anywhere until they're about 6. That's usually when stuttering comes out. You might have a child who just one day wakes up and starts stuttering. I typically go through a monitoring process with the families that call me very early on. So we watch it for about 2 to 3 months, depending on the history. And if they're still stuttering, if it's sticking around or getting worse, then we start therapy. It's always good to reach out and talk about it. That way I can follow the child and I can monitor them. Otherwise, sometimes we get parents who've waited 6 months or a year, and while that's okay, we can still work with that. The anxiety and the stress that builds up around it can have a lot of negative feelings attached to it, both for the family and for the child. So
That's interesting. So how do you go about letting parents know that their child may have an issue? And do you find that some parents are in a level of denial? That's the one question. And then how important is it that you intervene in the earlier years?
Right. So for stuttering specifically, and a lot of other speech and language disorders, the earlier the better. Even if your child doesn't need the therapy right away, at least we can have a baseline and we can start to monitor and follow up with the child and the family. I don't think parents tend to be in denial, but I do think that they get worried. They usually go to their pediatrician first. And at our practice, we work with a lot of different pediatric practices. We've even gone into the practices a number of times a year to talk about development in speech and language disorders. And the pediatricians are not speech therapists, and they're not physical therapists or occupational therapists, and they have to wear a lot of hats, and they don't always know the right answer, which is understandable. So a lot of parents who use the pediatrician as their first line of defense, where that's where they go when they're worried, they sometimes don't get the right information or enough information. And it's better to reach out to a specific professional like a speech therapist that can give information about what's appropriate at a certain age. Is it time to intervene? Is it time to monitor?
Saren, it's a very interesting time, and you are both a parent and a very accomplished therapist. What advice or guidance do you have for parents in general? You are right now homeschooling 2 daughters, ages...
Yeah. Almost 7 on Sunday, and 8.
Okay, so just something that maybe you, because you have this experience as a therapist, that you're doing with your children right now that could help any parent who's watching this.
Absolutely. I think these times are really difficult for a lot of parents, some who are working from home and some who are no longer working and trying to figure out what's going to happen next for my family. In our family, we try to put on pants every day and make sure my kids brush their teeth every morning and get into that regular getting ready for school routine. I try to make sure that my children have breakfast at a regular time. We get our schoolwork done on the earlier part of the day. So before lunchtime, we typically finish up whatever schoolwork we're supposed to be doing or working on what we were working on the day before. And then the afternoons we spend playing outside. I try to bring my computer with me throughout the day and answer phone calls and emails and do my therapy sessions in between. But trying to establish a routine is great. I think we can get lost in the stress sometimes, but the great thing about having parents home right now is that our children are getting so much time, quality time. They're getting a lot of language input. It's a good time to work on all those speech, language, developmental skills without the stress of sitting in a classroom and having to be in that classroom environment. So much can be done outside. So much can be done while you're doing your regular baking and playing. There's lots of ways to bring it into your regular activities.
You just touched on something very, very important, is that often children's language is developed through everyday interaction with the parent. And you obviously have a heightened awareness around that. So just again, if people want to reach you because they sense that their child may not be at the same verbal level as other children, what is the best way of getting in touch with you?
The best way to get in touch is to go onto our website, which is sagespeech.com. You'll find developmental information. You'll be able to contact me directly. You'll never get an office person. Whenever you call Sage Speech and Learning, you'll get me on the phone, and I can help you answer some of your early questions, find out if we need to go further with intervention or therapy. We can do assessments via teletherapy. So all of the same evaluations and assessments that we do in the office, we can do via teletherapy, which is great. Okay, we can get those out of the way. If you want to do therapy when we get back into the office, then at least the assessment would be done. So go onto our website, you'll find the phone number, the email, you'll find other information as well. And that way we can have a conversation and answer some questions for you.
And I think what's so important right now is that Saren is offering these services, even if you're sheltering in place, even if you're staying at home. And Saren, can you do this in any city in the United States, in any state, or are you licensed for Georgia specifically?
We are licensed for Georgia specifically. So any speech therapist can provide services in any state as long as they're licensed in that state. So each of my therapists, there's 10 of us here at Sage Speech. Each of us have a Georgia license as well as an ASHA license, which is a national licensing body for speech therapists. We're all fully certified speech therapists. We have no assistants or students at the moment. So every therapist that you work with on our team will be highly trained, has many, many years of experience. We have younger therapists. We have some that have been doing this for almost 30 years. We have people who are specifically trained in feeding, in stuttering, in developmental delays, autism, any sort of specific area that you're looking for. We've kind of formed that team around ourselves so that when a family comes in, they can be matched with the therapist that best fits their need.
Thank you to Saren Schapiro. So delighted she could join us. And first of all, the reason that I'd hoped that Saren would share some of her expertise is she's just another example of somebody who is pivoting. She's gone from in-person therapy to doing increasing amounts of teletherapy, but your child does not need to be left behind because school is no longer in-person school and they're doing this virtually. So thank you, Saren Schapiro, for joining us.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it.
Okay, and just every week, I hope to bring you people who are pivoting and people who can offer you advice and guidance for getting through this unprecedented time in our lives. I'm Nadia Bilchik. I was talking to Saren Schapiro. Thank you all so much for watching.